listening to the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. Radio's authority on the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology, celebrating 25 years of broadcasting. Broadcasting around the world and to the great beyond.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Worldwide, toll-free 800-610-7035. Email xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV. And our main website where you can listen to the X-Zone, 7/24/365, as well as the live show Monday through Friday from 8 p.m. until midnight. www.xzoneradiotv.com. And don't forget, you can also watch the first season of the X-Zone TV show at xzonetv.com. My guest this hour is Donald B. Carroll. He spent his career working in fire and rescue as a district chief, academy instructor, and paramedic. Now, during those 30 years, he raised a family and pursued the meaning of life through extended study into the Edgar-Cayce readings and other spiritual, scientific, and philosophical materials. He spent 10 years researching and writing this new book, Sacred Geometry and Spiritual Symbolism, The Blueprint for Creation, which was published by Fourth Dimension Press, an imprint of ARE Press. Today, Donald is a regular speaker and writer of metaphysical topics from Cayce to Kundalini. He is also an international tour leader for Nonprofit Association for Research and Enlightenment, visiting sites of spiritual nature across the world. He will be leading a tour to sacred and mystical sites in England in September of 2016, and you can learn all about these tours at edgar-cayce.org or by visiting Donald's website, donaldbcarroll.com. And Donald B. Carroll, welcome to the X-Zone.
Well, Rob, thank you for inviting me. You're very kind, and please call me Don.
All right, Don, tell me, I've got a lot of respect for the fire and rescue people. They do a fantastic job, so thank you for your service, first of all. But what was it that made or guided you to write about sacred geometry? Isn't that a little bit off base for fire and rescue people?
Yeah, fire and rescue, you're with what you deal with in emergencies. You're pretty pragmatic, but when you spend a career of about 33 years in it, and as we provided the paramedics, you deal with a lot of life and death and all the questions that come through with that. And I would say it's kind of not only been my journey even earlier than that, and that just helped extend it. I think it's humanity's journey about understanding that, we are more than, what our bodies here, our consciousness and our spirituality goes much further. So all during that time, I, pursued it. And then as I retired, it gave me an opportunity to pursue it. And even as I was doing it then in much more detail.
Bringing heaven and earth together in ourselves, humanity's journey, what does this mean?
As I said, I see it as humanity's journey. We've heard the term before about bringing heaven and earth together. And really, if you look at spiritual traditions around the world, it's really what they're striving for. If you look at whether sacred sites or the concepts in the Bible, other places where they go to worship the high places because that's where heaven and earth came together. The axis mundis. That was symbolic of raising that higher consciousness, that spirituality within ourselves to become. In Western tradition would be, you might say, Western Christian tradition, become Christ-like would be the term. In Eastern traditions and in Hindu and Buddhist traditions, you become a bodhisattva, an enlightened one on earth, to bring that heaven and earth together while we're here and help others and evolve on our own path.
You deal with sacred geometry and spiritualism, symbolism. Well, for our listeners who may be hearing about sacred geometry for the very first time, how would you describe it?
Yeah, a lot of people, when the first time they hear that, okay, what's sacred about geometry? And what it is, it's the geometry, you might say, of spiritual symbolism. Sacred geometry really is that.
Listen, I'm going to give you a bit of a break here because we have to take our break.
Sure.
We'll be back on the other side of this commercial, X-Zone. Don't go away.
You're listening to the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
Donald B. Carroll is our special guest this hour, X-Zone. We're talking about Donald's new book. It's entitled Sacred Geometry and Spiritual Symbolism, The Blueprint for Creation. www.donaldbcarroll.com is his website. That's DONALDBCARROLL.com. So, Donald, how would we describe sacred geometry?
Sacred geometry is just a term for, and you find it in many spiritual symbolisms of many cultures and religions. It's universal patterns that we find throughout our reality, and quite often is seen in sacred architecture or what's considered sacred art. It's the basic belief that there are these universal patterns in mathematics and geometry and harmonics and music and light and cosmology, and they reflect each other. It's kind of like the Hermetic term of as above, so below. They not only reflect each other in the geometries of the universe, but in the geometry and patterns of ourselves. And more than a reflection, it's shows a unity in oneness. I mentioned sacred architecture. Probably one of the most simplest ones to look at along that line of that symbols is you go to the Gothic cathedrals that you find in Europe during that period. They're always made in the form of a cross, for the representation. So, that's just one example. There are many more, but that's the basics of sacred geometry.
How does sound and the creation of the universe play into this symbolism?
Well, yeah, it's actually, I find that very fascinating in that, because if you first looking at sound in almost all your traditions, how the universe was created and what we have today was created, the earth, etc., by spiritual traditions is God spoke. God breathed across the waters. Eastern traditions, the Om, the sacred word of creation. And so, actually even before light, there was sound. Let there be light. And so it was sound. And what's fascinating with that is science is now coming out from NASA work and the CERN Institute and the Planck spacecraft project, is that they're coming to the conclusion now that the universe, what we have today, the universe was created from sound. So fascinatingly, in recent years, science is now confirming what spiritual traditions, whether Eastern or Western, have been saying for thousands of years. So we have that sound creating, from that sound, the Big Bang, so to speak, creating matter from that. Science confirming that, and the spiritual traditions have been saying that. And when you look at that, and as they describe it, it's kind of like ripples across a lake. If you threw a bunch of pebbles into a lake or a pond, and you get all these
ripples,
circular ripples going out in all ways and crisscrossing each other and creating spiritually these patterns, which would be from that, like the Vesica-Pisces, very simple example, which is just two overlapping circles, and where they overlap creates that almond shape. In Italian, it's called the mandorla, but it creates that almond shape. And well, in the 15, 14, and even actually back to the 1100s, if you look in Christianity, in that petal almond shape, they would actually use that, and only two individuals were allowed to be put inside that shape, because it represented in sacred geometry the creative energy, the creative womb, goddess energy, so to speak. But the two people that were allowed in the Christian tradition to put in there was Jesus and his mother Mary, which is interesting because, Jesus, the Christ in the tradition, was the Son of Man and Son of God. So he brought heaven and earth together, and Mary brought God, birthed God onto earth. So she was another channel, so to speak, of bringing heaven and earth together. And again, here's these kind of ripples that are depicted. It's a very elegant way of what would be depicted the same way in science. And then Vesica-Pisces is also known as a form generator, very briefly, from those two overlapping circles. Simply with a straight edge and a pencil, you can create all the polygons, which is the technical math term from the triangle to the square, pentagon, heptagon, septagon. So almost wave to particle in the science aspect of it, in which what science is saying, the universe being created from sound into matter, to the same thing spiritual traditions say.
So could we say that the crop circles that are cropping up all over the place could be modern day sacred geometry or symbols?
Yeah, I am not that familiar with crop circles, but the ones I've seen of them, if you see most of them, a lot of them replicate what we see in the spiritual and sacred geometry traditions, the flower of life, the Sri Rantra, the six-pointed star, and all of those things that, yes, they are very similar to that.
What evidence is there for the idea, for your idea when it comes to sacred geometry and spiritual symbolism, when we look at megalithic structures such as the Great Pyramid, the Maya Chichen Itza site, Stonehenge, or even ancient America's Pueblan culture? How do we explain this, or what evidence is there that it goes a lot further than ancient civilizations trying to rationalize the world that they live in?
Well, and what I've found is it's really fascinating at these sites that you mentioned, and what I've found at those sites is all those sites are known now. Science is kind of catching up now that we have the computer power and what have you, that these sites were the symbolic, and they're all initiation sites, were symbolic representations of joining heaven and earth together. Chichen Itza, as an example, is known that at the equinox you get that created by light, a serpent going down the staircase, a serpent of light connecting to the head, the serpent head in stone at the base, and up to the top. If you go on YouTube or something, you can Google that and do a time lapse. It's incredible. You see that. So it was a representation of physically at an initiation site, bringing heaven and earth together and to raise that within yourself. Stonehenge is known specifically as an initiation site, and it known as, all these sites have somewhere or another, astronomy connections, whether lunar, solar, stellar of some sort. They know, Gerald Hawkins wrote a great book and showed that, how the equinoxes and solstices and lunar phases are lined up in Stonehenge. I mentioned the ones at Chichen Itza, how they line the sun up. You have similar things they found with the Great Pyramid, and again, all symbolic sites to connect heaven and earth together, and as initiation sites. And the Hopi, or not the Hopi, the ancestral Pueblans, like in Chaco Canyon, were known. I mean, the archaeologists actually say there, like Pueblo Bonito, one of the great houses, was the Axis Mundi, which means, it's the Latin term of bringing heaven and earth together. That was their Axis Mundi. These were all sites to tie that. Actually, a perfect example is Machu Picchu in Peru. At the top of Machu Picchu, at the temple there, is a altar, kind of bedrock carved stone, which is known as the hitching post of the sun, because at the solstices, it lines up, creates no shadow, and so they called it the hitching, to tie the sun to the earth, to bring heaven and earth together. They were representing this in these sites of temples and altars for this initiation of bringing that higher self, as I said, kind of in the Old Testament, where it writes about going to the high places in order to worship, because that was the closest to bringing heaven and earth together.
How do we explain so many different cultures and so many different parts of the world have this fascination with the sun, the solstice? What's the reasoning behind this, and why the significance?
Well, yeah, the sun, the moon, and many of them, specific stars, Egypt and stuff. But yeah, with the sun, particularly, and of course, it was so important for the agriculture and food. But so it was very important into life giving, and again, the connecting to the heavens. Interestingly, enough in that aspect, it's actually in many places we wouldn't expect. The birth of Jesus is December 25th, very close to the winter solstice. And the interesting part, John the Baptist, who was by Bible related, his birthday is celebrated June 24th, the other solstice, and which means when the sun stood still. So even in those places, we have those connections. And again, it's as not only the importance of giving life on earth, but the connection to the heavens and to life, and to a much higher life, a spiritual life, a heavenly life.
Very interesting topic. Don, you and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Please stand by. X-Zone Nation, Donald B. Carroll is our very special guest this hour. Interesting. Sacred geometry is the topic of the hour here in the X-Zone. Don is the author of Sacred Geometry and Spiritual Symbolism, The Blueprint for Creation. 2 websites, X-Zone Nation. First of all, Don's website, donaldbcarroll.com. That's www.donaldbcarroll.com. And then for our good friends at the ARC, edgar-cayce.org. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone. And Don and I will be back on the other side of this news break as we continue broadcasting from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't forget, you can always listen to the X-Zone 724-365 at xzoneradiotv.com and watch the first season of X-Zone TV, the X-Zone TV show at xzonetv.com. We'll be back. Don't go away.
You're listening to the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
Welcome back, Exo Nation. My guest this hour, very interesting gentleman. His name is Donald B. Carroll. He spent his career in fire and rescue as a district chief, academy instructor, and paramedic. And during those 30 years, he raised a family and pursued the meaning of life through extended study into the Edgar-Cayce readings and other spiritual, scientific, and philosophical materials. He's the author of Sacred Geometry and Spiritual Symbolism, The Blueprint for Creation. A couple of websites, www.edgar-cayce.org and Don's website at donaldbcarroll.com. So would you say then, Donald, that sacred geometry has actually confirmed the existence of Christ?
Interesting question, because that's one of those biblical archaeology versus other archaeology debate.
Yeah.
And of course, Christ is an appellation. It's not his name. The Anointed One, and it's the Western tradition of one raising one's higher consciousness into the universal or God consciousness, depending on the Christ consciousness, depending on what term you want to use. In
Sure.
Eastern tradition, as I mentioned earlier, they would call them bodhisattvas, who have reached enlightenment on earth and helped others. For that there was a Jesus the Christ, I would say yes, but what sacred geometry does is show that concept of bringing heaven and earth together within ourselves, raising that consciousness into a Christ-like or bodhisattva-type consciousness, is a theme and a goal throughout the globe, whatever spiritual philosophy you have. There's a book called Cosmic Consciousness, by a gentleman by the name of Burke, written in the early 1900s, about exactly that, where he lists something like 30 people he feel, Buddha, Christ, and others or Jesus, that reached that point. And it's even in the Bible, it says, it quotes that I've told you everything the Father's told me to his apostles. You can do things greater than I. That we all have that potential to be Christ or bodhisattvas, if we allow ourselves.
So do you think that based on the research that you've done into sacred geometry and spiritual symbolism, that there are more of these prophets or more of these spiritual leaders like Christ and like Buddha that are still to come before we reach the final plateau, before entering into the new age of spiritualism?
I think yes, and I think it's a continuing cycle. I mean, human beings seem very linear thinking people, but if you look at nature and the world, everything shows that it's cyclical.
Exactly.
And some of your older cultures showed that it's not linear, folks. It's cyclical, that we'll go through these cycles, and as you said, we'll have, as we've had them in the past in different traditions, that that in the future we will have people that reach that point.
My philosophy on life is very simple, very basic. Life is simple. We complicate it. And the best example I can give you of this is Mother Nature, in all her wisdom, has been showing us from day one that life is never ending. For example, you have the spring, the birth. You have the summer, the maturity. You have the fall, the older years. You have the winter, the elder years, and the passing. But then it doesn't stop. It goes right back to the spring and starts all over again. Now, what is so hard about understanding that concept? If that relates to nature, we are part of nature. Hello, the writing is on the wall. Yes.
And I agree with you that it is cyclical, and it's life, death, or passing, and rebirth, and it's the kind of thing you don't whether you want to call it heaven or universal consciousness, you don't go there, you grow there.
Yes.
And you grow there through learning through multiple cycles. Actually, Teilhard de Chardin, who wrote several great books, The Human Condition and a few others, who was a world-famous, besides a Jesuit priest, paleontologist involved with the discovery of the Peking man, wrote about our consciousness is about evolving, maturing into being able to be connected with a God consciousness, to be able to be mature enough to connect to it. He called it the new sphere, which is when consciousness is around the world are able to connect, reaching an omega point of where we're able to touch the Empyrean light or the God consciousness, but it's a matter of conscious evolvement. It's kind of like, I look at it as when people ask, well, how do we do that? It's like becoming that friend of that kind of universal consciousness, or a peer or co-creator, which some people are uncomfortable with. It's like, when my children were growing up, when they were 5 or 6 years old, I loved them dearly, but they couldn't be a friend, a peer. They were children, but now they're adults, and I love them as dearly, and they're friends and peers now. And our consciousness, I think, we're here to do that same evolvement, as Chardin spoke about, and others.
I remember when my children were 5 and 6, they would listen. Laura and I have 6 children, and now it's our time when the children come and say, Dad, Mom, payback time. But it's true. What you're saying is so true. And let me ask you this. What would happen, in your opinion, if we were to take the past and learn more about the past and the lessons that the ancients tried to get us to understand? What kind of world do you think we would be in today?
Well, a more consciously and altruistic and helper of one's brother world. And it's the irony to me, well, that's why the cycles of getting there, the irony to me is that it's really, it seems to me, hidden in plain sight. You look at so many different traditions, again, the high places, heaven and earth. Right. You look at Revelation. Revelation talks about when the New Jerusalem comes down to earth, and so it's talking about when heaven and earth come together, and that's the one tradition. They have it in Islamic tradition, they have it in Judaic tradition, the Buddhist and Hindu traditions, but it's almost so obvious we don't see it, and we get distracted on the daily toils, and we seem to take less and less time to have quiet time to ourselves, whether you want to call it reverie or meditation, to allow ourselves to have that depth.
Well, it's pretty hard to have quiet times when we're inundated with data 24 hours a day. Like I was talking to somebody the other day, and then again this evening, where people look down and text instead of looking forward and seeing what's around them. And the analogy that best describes it is a cartoon that someone sent me. It's of Times Square, and there's a UFO hovering over Times Square, and these two little aliens under the UFO trying to get someone's attention to shake their hand, and everyone is just texting.
Yeah, well, and I think to a certain extent we choose those distractions, because we can also choose to turn off the phone, turn off the TV, or have that quiet time. I mean, myself, I over time, probably the last 12, 13 years, I've learned what they call, now the term is mindfulness, but to be a daily meditator, to specifically take that 30 minutes to go into, that. And actually, if you look at all the spiritual traditions, they contemplative prayer, meditation, mindfulness, whatever term you want to use, all tell you to do that. But we find the distractions because I think part of it is that's when we really start to look at ourselves. And people seem to have a tendency, myself included, to avoid that.
We have learned through history that there is an effect with the power of prayer. And it seems in today's society that less and less people are actually interested in coming together, whether it is in a church, whether it is in a field, whether it is anywhere. And if you want to call it meditation, let's call it meditation. If you want to call it prayer, let's call it prayer, whatever your preference is. You would think in these days and these times that people would be coming together to try and make that positive difference that we all can make. And I believe in the power of prayer. I believe in the power of belief. In my opinion, belief is the strongest power in the universe. So I have a problem trying to understand why people of today do not get the hint that the ancients knew only too well.
Well, and even in that time, you look at the ancient histories, not everybody was getting it, so to speak.
Right.
Not everyone was going there. It seems probably why we go through these cycles of some are looking consciously to evolve to that, some unconsciously, subconsciously, and some are just too distracted. It's, again, going back to the analogy of children, what's the attention span of a 5 or 6 year old versus an attention span of an adult?
Sure.
And belief is, and not only belief, it's been proven in meditation. I find it quite interesting. It's been around for thousands of years, but prior to about the 1950s, they would tell you, oh, well, yeah, it's subjective. It's all in your head, obviously, but it's just what, you're feeling. But then when science was able to catch up and create machines that could read brainwaves, EEGs, suddenly they're like, oh, brainwaves are changing when they meditate. Alpha waves are going up. Beta waves are going down. We're seeing it strengthens the immune system. It lowers blood pressure. And now that they have machines that can measure it, it's real for science. It was real before, but science couldn't measure it, so it couldn't count.
But can you blame people for being leery? Because throughout history, academia, religion, and other people that the citizens used to look up to lied through their teeth. So it comes to a point where, prove it.
Sure, and there are, unfortunately, in human nature, there are the quote-unquote snake oil salespeople out there. But then there are the ones that are found, and I understand the scientific method. I get it, repeatable, measurable. But just because science hasn't created the gauges to measure it doesn't make it not real. Meditation is a perfect example. They're finally able to measure it and see the difference. They're actually showing now, long-term meditators, parts of their brain grow. And they're the higher consciousness, the higher thought processes parts. They're just now able to, through, PET scans and things, other aspects, able to actually, show that. But again, at the same time, you always are going to have people out there that are going to take advantage of very well-meaning, heartful people looking to raise it. And I think the other thing is that you deal with people that, are on a spiritual path and are doing the right thing, but I think it seems so often, and again, history shows it too, Buddha being tempted by Maya illusion, Jesus being tempted, his temptation 40 days in the desert type of thing, and they pass that. But when you start raising your consciousness up to that, people are drawn to you and start, want to worship you, and it's like, whoa, but it can be very tempting. We're still human, and that's usually when we start thinking, well, gee, this feels pretty good. They must be right, and we have our fall, so to speak.
Yeah.
So you have that, and then, unfortunately, some of those salesmen I spoke of that look to take advantage of. But, whether in corporations or today's business or spirituality, you know them by their fruits.
In today's society, as you just said, there are a lot of snake oil salesmen out there. But they found a new method instead of knocking door to door. It's called WWW. And there are so many charlatans out there, with the exception of the very few. And the people at the ARE, in my books, are the most credible, some of the most credible people that I've ever had the pleasure of talking to. They want to make a positive difference. They're not out just to make a name for themselves. And you know what? Hats off to you, because I know you're part of the ARE, and hats off to the rest of the members of the ARE, because you people, the work you do is very important. So please, never give it up.
Well, and thank you. That's very kind to say. And really, that's my experience there. It's people that, the belief, the faith, and also of trying to bring others, along to help that, because of, the journey, it's whether it's really, you look at so many writers, they've written about the hero's journey or the Grail kind of quest thing, that it's always, there's perilous. And speaking of the Grail, it's like in the King Arthur's court, there was that one siege. If you were going to go on the one seat, if you were going to go on the quest, the seat was called Siege Perilous, to tell you that this is a journey that is not an easy one.
All right, Don, please stand by. Great talking to you. And once again, to not only you, Don, but every other firefighter, paramedic, first responder, police officer, thank you for the important and valuable service that each one of you provide each and every day of the year. We'll be back on the other side of this break, X Zone Nation. Don't go away.
You're listening to the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
And welcome back, everyone. Donald B. Carroll is my special guest. He's the author of Sacred Geometry and Spiritual Symbolism, The Blueprint for Creation. Here's a couple of websites, Exonation, www.edgar-cayce.org, and Don's website at www.donaldbcarroll.com. Before you go, Don, I understand that you're going to be going on a trip with people going to England in September of this year. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's about a 10-day trip. It's on the Edgar Cayce website. England is incredible. I've been fortunate enough to be able to be there before, and the sites there are amazing. We're going to, very fortunate, this time we're going to Stonehenge, which we spoke about, an incredible site, and we're actually gotten the special permits to go inside of Stonehenge, inside the stone circles themselves, and have some time in there, and actually, going to do a meditation in there, which will be very nice. And then we'll be going over to the Avebury, huge stone circle. There's actually a small town inside the middle of that. And again, these megalithic sites are just so, and they're actually finding more and more. If you look at Stonehenge Uncovered, they've been doing a lot of research there. It's still buried, but they found what they call a super Stonehenge, 5 times the size of Stonehenge, through ground penetrating radar. So they're still discovering so much there. And then we're going to spend 3 days in Glastonbury, which is personally, Glastonbury is incredible. You have the Glastonbury tour up there that is this fascinating site. You know, there's much talk of the ley lines, the telluric lines that all connect there, and then there's the chalice well from the tradition of Joseph of Arimathea, bringing over not only the chalice from Jesus from the Middle East, but also Mary.
That's right.
And then you have the Glastonbury Abbey, which is incredible. And we're going to have 3 days there, so you can really explore and appreciate the site, along with going to Stratford-on-Avon, where Shakespeare was from, and some other megalithic sites that aren't on the general path, along with Silbury Hill, which is this amazing megalithic made hill, the largest one in Europe, man-made, that's connected, evidence showing it connected to Stonehenge and the Uffington horse chalk carving in the side of one of the mountains there. It's just, it's really, there is the ancient sites in England are really, and the history there is really incredible.
Fascinating. Don, thank you ever so much for coming on the show tonight. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. Come on, give your book a final plug in your websites. Come on, you can do it.
Well, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm not the best at that. It's it was 10 years of research, probably a lot of it trying to prove myself wrong, but it's about, sacred geometry and spiritual symbolism and how it creates this blueprint of creation. And my website, www.donaldbcarroll.com, which I've written other articles that I've posted on there, and the edgar-cayce website, where there's some of the stuff I've written on there, edgar-cayce.org, along with the information for that England tour coming up this September.
Don, take care of yourself. Congratulations on a book. Well done. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and please, my very best to all the great people at the ARE.
I will, Rob. Thank you very much.
Good night, sir. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break, X-Zone Nation, as we continue live and around the world from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.